14th, 2018. I would like to start by calling the roll. Present in attendance are myself, Alderwoman Shanika Henson, Committee Chair, and Alderwoman Eleanor Tierney. Alderman Fred Payon was unable to make it today. He did send his regrets and stated that he's dealing with a family emergency at this time. Myself and Alderwoman Tierney would constitute a quorum. We would still be able to have a majority and still be able to move today. But what we would like to do is just get an opportunity to have both of the nominees come before the committee and just answer some questions, give us a little bit of insight into your interest in the committee as well. We first thank you for being willing to serve your city and being willing to serve the City of Annapolis Housing Authority Board. We thank you for your interest in that and your willingness to commit your time and your talents to one of the city's most vulnerable populations. We do have some information that was forwarded to us by the mayor's office. I believe before us we have the appointment letter, we have also a statement of interest, we have your application, and then we have resumes as well. So we may have some questions that we ask directly from the information we have in front of us, and then some other questions as well that come from certain parts of the city code that require us to assess pieces of information to judge if there is a potential conflict of interest there, just to make sure that anybody that's on the board is able to fully participate as a member of the board. So with that being said, I will thank you. I will first ask if there is a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting. I motion that we approve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we, I'd like to motion to approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting.
I would second that motion and ask if all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. The minutes are approved. And we will get to the business of today. First, if we could have Mr. Gibbs take a seat at the table. Good afternoon, Mr. Gibbs, or evening.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Is the microphone on? Is the green light lit there?
Now it is.
Excellent. Thank you, sir, for coming before the committee. And again, thank you for being willing to serve the city on the Housing Authority Board. I first wanted to give you the opportunity to just tell us a little bit about yourself and in that your interest in serving on the board.
I've been a resident of Annapolis since 1990. My business is multifamily housing and the construction business, and about 95% of our work has been affordable housing, serving the underserved for better than 30 years. To be quite honest, you sit on the sidelines long enough and you watch, and it's time to jump in the game occasionally. And I'd like to offer my time and what talents I may have to help guide the Housing Authority. I do have a special interest in education, the education aspects of affordable housing. We've participated in the Seeds for Success program in Eastport and see the benefits of that, and I'm most interested in seeing how we can give children a better opportunity through education, through housing.
Excellent. Mr. Gibbs, I'll start the questions, and Alderwoman Tierney will have the opportunity to ask questions as well, and you certainly will have the opportunity to ask us any questions that you may have as well. I see on your resume that there is lots of experience, a real rich wealth of experience in working in the private industry. How would you describe your experience, if at all, working in a government, nonprofit, or public sector position?
Well, I've served on a number of nonprofit boards in the past. We do, while we are a private sector business, we do business with various housing authorities, have provided financing, or the projects have a close relationship with government agencies, whether it's a financing component for the developers. We are only a general contractor. We don't participate in the loans. We don't participate in any of the guarantees. We participate from a general contracting standpoint. We guarantee the completion of the projects, whether they be renovation or new construction.
Okay. One of my questions as well was to please describe your experience serving on any prior board or commission. I know that you mentioned some nonprofit boards. Could you give us a little bit of a feel for what your service has been like previously on a board or commission?
Would you like an outline of the names of the boards, or
The
what?
type of work that you were doing, when
Well-
you were engaged in that work, things like that.
Well, I was on when I've worked, I was on the hospital foundation board, and that was primarily for developing prospects for charitable gifts. I've worked on a bank board. I was on the board of directors for Howard Bank. After it got started, it's now not a small community bank, but it's a community bank based in Baltimore. They're about a $2 billion bank right now. And I worked on their loan committee as well as their CRA committee. Then I've worked in some boards related to pediatric care, health care with Johns Hopkins, and that was primarily focused on children health issues.
Can you describe your past experience with the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis? More so, any experience or exposure you may have had to the properties themselves, or the residents of the properties, or the staff that's there?
We were the general contractor when Annapolis Gardens Bowen Courts was redeveloped by Landex Development. Hamel Builders was the general contractor. I believe that's the only experience we've had. We also did Admiral Oaks, which is not a related entity, and we did Bay Gardens in town, and I don't believe the Housing Authority is involved there.
Could you describe your experience, if you've had any, with the residents in the Housing Authority properties?
Me personally I didn't have any interaction with the residents, and when we did Annapolis Gardens Bowen Court, I think that they had vacated the property substantially. So the company didn't really have any interaction, except for when residents moved back into their homes. We responded to any warranty request.
You mentioned work on Seeds for Success. In your work with Seeds for Success, did you have the opportunity to visit any of the properties that had residents, or to interact with the residents at
I
all
did.
on that level?
I did.
Okay. Could you tell us a little?
I just visited the facility as on a handful of occasions to meet children and meet the various volunteers. We were a donor.
Have you ever had any experience with ensuring compliance with HUD regulations?
Yes.
Could you describe that for us?
From a general contractor's aspect, we manage certified payrolls with HUD. We manage a couple other compliance issues, MBE, WVE compliance, as well as the requisition process is really driven by HUD. So we complete our requisitions, file them, and HUD approves them, and then we receive funds from either the lender or the state.
My next question, you touched on it a bit in your answer to that one. Could you describe for us your experience in working with complex budgets and varied funding sources for a project?
Well, I'm from the contractor's side. We are involved in multiple low-income tax credit projects, and the financing is about as complex as you can find this day and age. Most jobs have 5 to 8 lending sources, and everybody's got a lawyer and everybody's got an opinion. So I think they're quite complex and time-consuming.
The next portion of my questions I've derived from the city code. Our public ethics and financial disclosure are in the city code in section 2.08. It references the state code. In the state code, it says in section 13105 that notwithstanding any other law, the Annapolis Authority Commissioners, Executive Director, and Deputy Directors are local officials under any public ethics law of the Annapolis City Council. So the state code, which establishes the housing authority, in that same article where they establish the Annapolis City Housing Authority, they state that any commissioner on the board is to be treated for the ethics as any elected official. So the section that I'm referencing from the city code encompasses elected officials. I have excluded the portions that apply to employees only. So the next set of my questions are derived from that part of the code. Can you name all businesses with which you have a financial interest as defined by section 2.0802? They define having a financial interest in a business as within the past 3 years, you have received $1,000 or more in compensation, or you have at least a 3% ownership interest. That's part of the disclosures that we're all required to make. So could you let us know what businesses at this time that you have a financial interest in as defined by those two provisions?
I have a financial interest in Hamill Builders Incorporated, Hamill Builders of Washington, LLC, H&G Properties, and that's it. I do get a salary, or I don't get a salary from Hamill Commercial Incorporated, but I get a performance bonus. So that would, but I don't have an interest.
Okay, thank you. The code, when it is defining a person's ethics in their disclosure, it also asks it for certain immediate family members. It asks the same question for your spouse as well. All the businesses with which your spouse has a financial interest. Are you able to, to the best of your knowledge, are you able to tell us what entities your spouse may have a financial interest in as well?
Yes, ma'am. My wife has a financial interest in H&G Properties, and that's it.
Another portion of the code in section 208040, it goes on to describe prohibited conduct and interest. Is there any business with which you have a financial interest as defined by the code, the three that you've provided, that are subject to the authority of the city of Annapolis or are currently negotiating or has entered into a contract with the city of Annapolis, an agency, board, or commission?
Currently or in the past 3 years?
The first one of that act that's subject to the authority of the city of Annapolis. I believe what it's asking for there is anything that has a permit that's being that's currently being looked at or by the by our office here. Anything that may be regulated, such as holding a liquor license or anything where the
No.
city of Annapolis would have a regulatory interest over any of those three entities. And then for the part that references negotiating or a contract, that part is current. It's asking for just right now, this snapshot in time. Is there any business entity that is currently negotiating a contract?
I have an open building permit for my residence. That's the only permit that I'm involved with. And the second one, the question is no, I don't have an open.
The building permit for your residence, is that held personally or by one of the entities?
By my wife.
Okay. So that would be none of our concern.
Sure.
Next, is there any business with which your spouse has a financial interest that is subject to the city of Annapolis being regulated by, or is currently negotiating or entering into a contract?
Just that building permit.
There is a portion of the code in section 208040C where it says that for a period of 1 year after an elected official leaves office, that person may not assist any party, and we just amended that to say assist for compensation, any party or represent any party in a case, contract, or other specific matter where that person had significantly participated while they were an official. So at this time, the housing authority term, even when it's over, there's a 1 year period where you could not assist or yourself engage in anything that you had a significant participation. So it would be any contracts dealing with the housing authority. Would you say that you're willing to commit to not participating or assisting in participating in any contracts with the housing authority for 1 year after your term?
I don't have a problem with that.
And then it also prohibits anyone from soliciting or accepting any gifts. It goes on to do that in section F, and it does carve out an exception for gifts that you are able to accept. It's anything that's under $35, any ceremonial gifts or awards, any unsolicited gifts which nominal value does not exceed $20, any reasonable expenses for food and travel, any gifts or tickets or free admissions. You would have to disclose a specific gift or class gift that commissions exempt where there is not a commission attached. Any gift from any person that is related to you, you could still accept, and any honorarium for speaking. Other than that, it would prohibit you from accepting any gifts from anyone that's engaging in business with the city of Annapolis. Are you agreeable to that as well?
Yes.
Are you willing to agree not to disclose confidential information as defined by section G of that? Well, I wouldn't say as defined because it just states confidential information. But if you were appointed to the board, would you be agreeable to not disclosing anything confidential?
Yes.
Are you willing to not participate in procurement as defined by section 208040H? In that section, it states that any person may not submit a bid or proposal, may not assist or represent directly or indirectly anyone who is submitting a bid or proposal for procurement. So that is during your term. It would prohibit you from assisting, prohibit you from directly bidding. So are you agreeable to not doing that during your term?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. And Alderwoman Tierney, did you have any questions?
I did. I have actually just three. The first one is just in reaction. You understand what Shanika's doing there in the application. It's Annapolis City Code Chapter 2.08 and all those requirements. I am a little concerned on the recusing of 1 year on, because of your expertise, you should be involved in perhaps the list of, developers that they're looking at. And so am I to understand then that he could not be involved in that because of his experience in construction and development, or I'm sort of directing the question to
Well, that's
the
a very
chair.
good question, and I was going to ask that question.
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
a different perspective. The concern is I do business with various nonprofit and for-profit developers that happen to respond to many of the RFPs. For example, Penrose Development is doing work for the Housing Authority.
Yeah.
And I I have just completed a project for them in Washington D.C. So and I've done work for
I
Homes
mean, I
for
guess as-
America.
yeah. As long as you don't have a financial, I mean, I don't know, we could always, ask Jim Dawzel, the chair of the Ethics Commission, and, on particular situations.
I wouldn't mind clarification, because I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
misrepresent anything.
Sure.
I'm going to continue my business. I just choose not to do business in the city of Annapolis
Yeah.
with the Housing Authority.
Right,
I'm willing to do that. And I've been asked by a number of developers, am I quite certain I don't want to have an opportunity to build any of the upcoming projects if they're redeveloped? And I'm comfortable with that. My business is doing well enough that I could stay away for the time being.
okay. My other two questions, one of them is actually in response to what you said, from observing HACA and seeing some of the issues. What would you feel would be your priority in trying to put them in a better financial position, or better situation? What did you observe as some of their weaknesses, I guess is the best way of phrasing that? You obviously saw something that said, gee, they need help or your expertise, and what would that be?
Well, certainly, if you believe a portion of what you read, and there have been some struggles, I believe one of the more important things is trying to get them on a steady financial track and certainly maintain proper procurement processes, but more importantly, I think repositioning the properties in a responsible way, and not, we do a lot of work where we don't displace residents, and that, I think that's important.
What does that mean, repositioning?
Refinancing.
Oh, okay.
I understand the Housing Authority has talked about the RAD program. Public housing is in transition, and I think understanding the complexity of that financing is helpful in guiding the organization.
So that leads me to my last question, which is very general. I mean, as you know, in President Trump's 2017 budget, the capital budget he reduced by 67.5%, and his operating budget for affordable housing is 11+%. So we need to look at alternative funding, and the RAD program has elevated itself with some trepidation, because the optics look like we're, kind of camouflaging, privatizing. So I'd like to know your thoughts on moving forward with those fiscal restraints. You sort of touched upon that in your previous answer, but it's a big problem.
It's a very big problem, and I don't know, it's not an easy problem to solve completely. I don't believe there's a magic bullet yet. I think RAD is one of the programs that we've seen to be successful at repositioning the properties, getting the necessary renovations completed, and providing clean, safe housing for the residents. And there's other communities, if you just move your attention to Howard County, several years ago, they repositioned a project called Burgess Mill, which they increased some density and added some market rate housing within the already existing units, and it made the difference. And I think the beauty of Annapolis is the market is close enough. We all live among all types of housing, and I think that could work. But I'm not suggesting that that's the only way it can work. I think that we need to explore opportunities and avenues to renovate the housing, get units that are down, up, and get people in housing.
You know, I just thought of one last question that, because we're talking about finances and everything, I forgot another real important issue is security. We've gone back and forth on the city providing security, what is the, role of our police force, versus Hackett's own security. Do you have any thoughts on that? It's not really getting into
security
yeah.
becomes more of a decision of a developer or a management company. I think that there's various levels of security that are provided. We have access control on properties that we install. We have security cameras, and then they have on-site security in some properties. There's a property, McCullough Homes in Baltimore, that we're working on right now that's a part of the RAD program, that they have full-time security guards as well as a robust security camera program.
Who was that? The developer, you said?
The developer is the Community Builders,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's the Housing Authority of Baltimore City.
Oh.
It was a Housing Authority property.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I yield.
Thank you, Alderwoman Tierney. I did get a question from Alderman Savage. He sent it in via email. He was unable to be here. He's not a committee member, but he does represent Ward 5, and he did have some concerns, some questions that he was asking about the ethics of being on Hamel, of working for them, and then also serving the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis. So he just wanted to clarify. Your position at Hamel, what is your job there? I think we have it on your resume, but what's your title there?
I am president and co-founder.
The concern that he's expressing there, I want to try to characterize that without being the president and the co-founder there at Hamel. It would mean that all of the entities of Hamel that you are president and co-founder of, Hamel Builders, Inc., Hamel Builders of Washington, LLC, and H&G Properties, would not be permitted to do business with the Housing Authority, certainly. And then under some parts of this code, it may be saying, and we will reach out to the ethics for the exact interpretation of that, with the city in general. Are you stating that not only just building the wall around yourself to isolate from conflicts, making sure you don't have any direct dealings, but are you stating that Hamel is willing to bow out of doing business with the City of Annapolis and Housing Authority during your term?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wanted to clear that. Thank you.
I am Hamel, so
Yes, good. Alderwoman Tierney, any questions based on that question?
No, I think we'll need some of the particulars, especially on the developer interaction, from Jim, the ethics chair, but thank you.
Did you have any questions for us, Mr. Gibbs?
No, that was it. I think the question of the interaction of developers that are doing business with the City of Annapolis through the Housing Authority or I'm not sure if any other agency that they do work for, but there's a handful of them that I wouldn't plan on terminating my relationship with them. We've worked for 30 years on some relationships, and I wouldn't turn that off.
We will reach out to the chair of the Ethics Commission
Okay.
just for a more formal answer, but I would agree with Alderwoman Tierney's interpretation of the code that it limits it to businesses with which you have a financial interest, and that being either 3% more ownership interest or receiving $1,000 a year or more in compensation. And that's compensation directly to you, not a contract with your business and their business, but that agency is paying you as an employee. But we will reach out for a specific interpretation of that.
As you just described, I'm quite confident I don't take anything, a gift. I've never been in the business of gifts or compensation for doing anything for any other person other than through a general contract arrangement.
Ironically enough, that it doesn't reference gifts, only compensation. So that's a good pickup in a part where we don't have a provision for that. But yes, sir, it is just compensation as an employee from any of those entities. We would also have to ask the Housing Authority per their regulations and resolutions if they have any internal regulation that would present a conflict or what their process is there as well. So we will reach out for clarification on that.
And lastly, if you're talking to the Ethics Committee, we are involved in the community in a philanthropic position, and we have given to Seeds for Success and Homes for America and a couple other of the nonprofit developers to fund after-school programs. And I just would like to make sure that that's clear, and I'm capable of continuing that.
You do the dragon boat races?
I do.
Yeah.
Catholic Charities was at my office today.
We will ask for clarification on that as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
for your candor today and for coming in. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next, I'll ask Mr. Miller, if you could take the seat there, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you both?
We're well, thank you, sir.
Okay.
I'll ask you first just to tell us a little bit about yourself and describe your interest in the Housing Authority.
My name is Michael Gregory Miller. I am the CEO of Ogos Energy LLC, which is a renewable energy development company, small company focusing on solar project development, mostly here in Maryland, with some broader interest in renewable energy, including wind. My family moved to Annapolis in 2006. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. My wife is from Anne Arundel County, and we have been involved with the greater Annapolis community ever since we moved here, not with any particular system, but which various organizations and initiatives that seem to call out for involvement from time to time. Most recently, I was a board member with Annapolis Life Care, Ginger Cove, coming to the end of one of my annual terms in June, but in fact just stepped down from that board a matter of days ago after several years of service. I was on the Maryland Commission for African American History and Culture for several years, which was an appointment by the governor, which had me involved with Banneker Douglas Museum around the corner from here, and have been involved with St. John's College of Annapolis as a board member for several years, but not within the last, say, 3 years. and try to be as active as possible in state, local, and federal electoral politics, advocating for the things that I believe very strongly in as a kind of organizer and donor and mentor in some cases. And I am by training a business person. I have an MBA in finance and spent quite a bit of time in corporate America in the Treasury area, basically doing structured finance, project finance, as well as corporate balance sheet, fixed income finance on the side of the borrower, and also a long-time investor in commercial real estate, both property and land, from a personal entrepreneurial standpoint.
Thank you, sir. Could you describe for us any of your experience working in or for a government agency, nonprofit, or public sector?
Sure. I have actually spent quite a bit of time working in the nonprofit sector. I actually worked for 6 years for an organization called AfriCare out of Washington, D.C. That's a 501c3 organization that does international development. So for 6 years, I was the chief financial officer of AfriCare. This dates back several decades ago. After being the chief financial officer of AfriCare, I returned to the private sector. And while in the private sector, I was elected to the board of directors of AfriCare. So I served on the board for a while. And then in 1994, coincident with the transition in South Africa from the apartheid government, I accepted a full-time position as AfriCare's resident director, or country director, we called it. So I literally moved to South Africa with my family and ran the AfriCare office and program in South Africa from 1994 to 1996. My first nonprofit job was as the business manager / chief financial officer of a little 4-year college in Miami, Florida, called Florida Memorial College. That was literally in the late 70s. And most people haven't heard of the college, but its biggest claim to fame is that James Weldon Johnson was on faculty there when he wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing. So that's how Florida Memorial College tries to identify itself and separate itself from other institutions. So those are two of my key roles in terms of the non-profit sector. AfriCare and its leadership was involved with the birth of a government agency called the African Development Foundation in 1985. And when that organization was stood up, I actually served for a year in a financial capacity there. And so that was my one and only year as an actual federal government employee. And my responsibility was to basically go around to various countries in Africa and set up the financial systems by which we ensured the stewardship of the appropriations that came into the African Development Foundation, and then would be given out as grants and loans to various businesses and entities across the continent of Africa. So I have spent some time directly working with government. When I was at IBM, I was involved in what they call the Federal Systems Division. So we literally sold to the federal government, and we put together very large, complex proposals, and we dealt with what they refer to as cost and pricing data, certifications, and all of the federal procurement regulations required to be a contractor to the federal government. So spent a lot of time working through the myriad of requirements of doing business with the federal government.
Could you please describe your past experience with the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis, its executive staff, its residents, or the properties themselves?
Sure. Well, I took an interest in serving on the board of HACA a couple of years ago, and so I expressed my interest to city government and provided a resume, etc. And I was brought in and sat down and met with Mayor Panelides and a member of his senior staff, and basically interviewed for HACA. And I certainly, in the course of various volunteer activities and political activities, have often been on various HACA properties or in meetings organized by or for residents of various communities. So I've spent, lots of time around and on HACA properties, and I also met the current director of HACA sometime in the last 3 years through, I think, at meetings, and when I met her, I'm not even sure now whether, I think I met her before she got involved with HACA. I'm sure it was, because I remember when it was announced that she was going to be heading up HACA, saying, "Oh, I know that person. I just saw them at a meeting." So I've never done any work with or for the executive director, but I met her and crossed paths with her on many occasions. And similarly, I've met and formed relationships with various past or present directors of HACA.
Could you describe, if any, your experience with ensuring compliance with HUD regulations?
Well, I don't know that I've had any directly relevant and certainly no recent experience, but I will say that going back, again, many decades, when I became the chief financial officer of the college I mentioned in Florida, that college faced a kind of crisis, which certainly was a very severe crisis for that institution. I won't compare it to HACA's situation because I'm not an expert on HACA's situation, but in that situation, this was a college which was about 100 years old, and it had been founded in St. Augustine, Florida. And in the early or mid-60s because they literally stopped being welcomed in the town of St. Augustine. The founding fathers cooked up a scheme to get them a beautiful grant of land and money on the condition that they would pick themselves up and move to Miami. So this college did, after almost 100 years in existence, relocate lock, stock, and barrel to Miami on a beautiful new campus of 50 or 60 acres, whatever it may have been. And they also were given lots of brand new buildings and given a bunch of money from what was then HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. And then they did have dormitory financing from I believe it was HUD, although it may have been from HEW. Anyway, a lot of things got lost in the translation, meaning that some of the administrators and faculty who had been with the institution for decades chose not to move 10 hours away from one end of Florida to the other. And 10 years after they got to Florida, they found themselves in pretty deep trouble with the federal government. So one of my jobs was to deal with a refund claim from HEW on the order of $7 or $8 million. And just to be clear, that was $7 or $8 million in 1977 money. So that was actually a bigger number than what it sounds like. And so we had to go through the process of point by point evaluating the claims for why money was considered. You basically go through the audit findings and the audit claims and the refund demand. And they weren't hostile. They were just basically saying they, the previous administration, hadn't followed the rules. So when I was handed this, it was kind of like, we need to figure out how we can get the money to pay this back. And I said to the president, well, we can first look at how we can reduce the amount of money they're asking us to pay back, and then we worry about the second part. So we did what we could do to document anything that they said was undocumented, and to explain away anything that we could explain away, and apologize for anything we couldn't explain away. And then we went with a big fat report and negotiated and begged and apologized. And we got the claim, reduced to something like on the order of like $1.5 million. And then we negotiated a payment plan on the reduced amount. So that was kind of an interesting experience that I had. And it was gratifying when we got them to agree to it. And it was interesting to find out that they were kind of like pleased that we were willing and able to come up with what we were able to pay, as opposed to just dinging us for the full amount, but then we wouldn't pay it because we didn't have it. So that was an experience I had, but that was like literally in 1977.
My next question, I believe you may have answered it in your previous answers. It is to describe your experience working with complex budgets and funding sources. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that? I already have some of your education background, and then some of your work working with structured finance and project finance, and your own investment in commercial real estate. Is there anything else to add there?
Well, I will say that the budgeting and the financial analysis that we do for our business, Ogos Energy, while the dollars are not gigantic, it is very complex because it involves tax equity, as well as debt, as well as sponsor equity, and our projects take 25 years to pay off, so it really is important to have really strong pro formas. So that's very important, and it's real money, and everybody gets paid before we do. So if you get it wrong, it's a big problem. But in terms of just size and complexity, the largest project I've worked on in absolute dollars was at IBM. We were bidding in the Federal Systems Group for redoing the air traffic control system. And we were head-to-head with one other company, which was called General Motors Hughes. And the bids were so large and complex that both IBM and Hughes had received each $250 million from the federal government, from the FAA, just to prepare our bids to compete with each other to see who would get the real bid. And I was the pricing manager for IBM. And then there was another manager, which was called the cost manager, and then there was a technical manager, and then there was an overall manager. So it was a gigantic team. I think we were like 200 people on the team, but I was very involved with the pricing and cost proposal, and we ended up being awarded a $3.5 billion bid and putting that together, and you had to have boxes and boxes just to ship out the bid, to the FAA for them to evaluate. So.
My next portion of questions are derived right from the city code in Chapter 2, Section 8. It asks that we have an understanding of all businesses with which you may have a financial interest. It defines financial interest as within the past 3 years having received $1,000 or more compensation or having at least a 3% ownership interest. Could you tell us all businesses with which you have a financial interest under that definition?
Okay, sure. My financial interest is limited to Ogos Energy LLC. Now, by compensation, you're not asking for a list of any customers that Ogos Energy LLC has had, I assume, or maybe you are. I'm not sure about that. But I am a dominant owner of Ogos Energy LLC. And in addition, my wife and I have an unincorporated proprietorship that owns and has owned real estate. And we own and operate a commercial property up at 820 Ritchie Highway in Severna Park. And we basically rent space out to various people. Building is modest-sized building. It's 15,000 square feet. But I don't think there's anything else.
To answer your question, compensation, it doesn't define compensation, but which would default it in my mind to then just layman terms of being paid. I think the spirit of the question is you being employed by, and then defining employment as anything where you've received $1,000 or more. So it would not be a list of customers or contacts, just any place you've been employed. I would ask the same question as well for your spouse. Any entities with which she has a financial interest in the past 3 years receiving $1,000 or more compensation or having a 3% ownership interest or greater?
No, none.
And then is any business with which you have a financial interest as defined subject to the authority of the City of Annapolis, meaning being regulated by the City of Annapolis, currently in a permitting process where they are seeking permits from the City of Annapolis or licenses, or is currently negotiating or entering into a contract with an agency, board, or commission?
No.
Is any business with which your spouse has a financial interest and subject to the authority of the City of Annapolis or negotiating a contract?
No.
Are you willing to not assist for compensation for 1 year after your term any party in a matter that you significantly participated? So any party that may be seeking to do business with the Housing Authority, having served on the board, even for 1 year after that term, are you agreeable to not assisting for compensation?
I am agreeable to that, but just to clarify, the question is, you're not asking about companies that seek to do business with the city of Annapolis. You're asking about companies that seek to do business with the Housing Authority?
The way that it's worded, it says significantly participated, so I would imagine that your experience on the board would limit you to significantly participating with just activities that concern Housing Authority properties. I can't envision where it would reach you to other matters of city affairs, but if it did, then this would then obligate you to not participate or assist for compensation. So if you were doing it as a volunteer, this wouldn't bar you, but if you were doing it for compensation and during your term on the board, you did have significant participation in another area of city government, this would limit you there.
So, for example, if I found an opportunity to do a solar project in or around Annapolis, would that be a matter to be reviewed at the time, or would that be something that I would be committing right here that I would forego? I'm not sure I understand how that works.
It reads, the section is post-employment limitations and restrictions, and it says a former official or employee may not assist for compensation or represent any party other than the city in a case, contract, or other specific matter involving the city if the matter is one with which the former official or employee significantly participated as an official or employee. For a period of 1 year after an elected official leaves office, a former member of the city council may not represent any party in a matter that is subject to legislative action. So that, working in connection with the Maryland Code, which states that all commissioners are local officials under any public ethics laws of the city of Annapolis, would kind of link you into both of those provisions. So it's saying that should it be a process where the person is seeking a case, a contract, or a specific matter with the city, your interests would have to be aligned with the city if you wanted to do it for compensation. If not, then it would be that you cannot participate for compensation with anything that you significantly, any subject matter where you significantly participated during your time on the board. Does that make sense?
Well, the question, and it doesn't really relate to whether it's in the year after HACA or during the time that I'm serving on HACA. The question that isn't very clear to me, and not that I have anything in mind, but if, for example, in 3 months, if I were fortunate enough to serve on the board of HACA, if in 3 months the city decided that they wanted to do another solar farm, would I be precluded from potentially being a part of a team that bid on that or not? And I'm not saying that that's a problem. I'm just not clear from the question what's being asked of me and what I would be saying yes or no to.
I will, unless Alderwoman Tierney has some different insight on that, I will forward that to the Ethics Commission as well and get them to give you a clear answer on their interpretation of that. It is a very fair question.
Okay, thank you.
Are you willing to not solicit or accept gifts other than those gifts deemed acceptable by Section 208040F? I did go into the list of things that are acceptable, certain dollar amounts that you could not receive over, certain things that if you receive, you would have to disclose, such as tickets or free admission. Are you agreeable to not soliciting or accepting gifts?
I am. And I have a question about that.
Sure.
Does that mean if I'm on the HACA board that I can't make contributions to candidates or elected officials in Annapolis?
Mr. Gibbs had that question regarding different nonprofits and entities, so we will forward that question as well. Candidate contributions.
You should know the answer to that.
Right. I'm sure the Ethics Commission would probably rather answer their own questions than have us interpret their portion of the code. So we will forward that question as well. Are you willing to agree not to disclose confidential information?
Yes, I'm willing to do that.
And are you willing to not participate in procurement as defined by section 20840H? And that says, an individual or person that employs an individual who assists a city agency or unit in drafting of specifications, an invitation for bids, or a request for proposals for a procurement may not submit a bid or proposal for that procurement or assist or represent another person directly or indirectly who is submitting a bid or proposal for the procurement. So it's saying you could not submit a bid or assist someone else who was submitting a bid on a project with which you are reviewing or accepting a bid. Are you
Ye-
agreeable to that?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. And I will defer to Alderwoman Tierney if she has any questions.
Oh, just a few. Just for clarity, could you just speak to your role and if you're currently involved in this, the Arundel Group, being real estate?
Yeah, I alluded to that. The Arundel Group is just a DBA. It's not an entity. But as I mentioned, we do own a commercial property up in Severna Park. And we have done various consulting work over the years. And sometimes I just use Arundel Group as a DBA, but that's not an entity, any income that might have been associated with quote-unquote Arundel Group is just under my own kind of social security number, et cetera, et cetera.
And like Mr. Gibbs, you come with, we're very fortunate that you both come with your each unique toolbox of work skills, and I just can't underplay your experience in Africare. Were you in the Peace Corps, or was that, I mean, it's kind of evolved from the Peace Corps.
Yeah, I was not in the Peace Corps, but the founders and many of the other people at Africare were in the Peace Corps.
Just because of, their outreach to local communities and their work with NGOs and government and the private sector, I just think that that's a really valid perspective, always, learning something from another country, is a totally different perspective. And that, when you talk about your work there, and this, I'll come to the question, but you have here developed innovative projects including government internships for young professionals, digital village, computer learning centers in disadvantaged townships. And you also wrote proposals for grants to assist the community. Do you plan on utilizing that type of engagement? Is that your priority in your role with HACA? You have experience in finance, you're a problem solver, but this experience in Africa, engaging the community, it just is a very unique strength, and I'm hoping that is something that you want to contribute, or do you see it just as some learning experience for you? Is there tools there that you can take and apply?
I would think that, first of all, I have to be mindful of my position, which would be as a board member, and the role of a board member is different from staff or anyone else. So I would think that I would hope to contribute to good governance, which I think is essential to allowing an organization to actually, pursue and achieve its mission. So I would say first and foremost, I would hope to make a contribution to good governance. Secondly, I would hope to make a contribution to strategic planning and and certainly, my basic, everybody says if you have, a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I mean, my hammer is financial analysis. I mean, I'm a finance person. So those are the areas in which I would presume to contribute most to in terms of the HACA House hat. And as far as community building or community development, I would certainly want to see any part of if the management of HACA and if the residents of HACA are focused on strengthening resident participation or making sure that there's a balance between the fiscal issues and the human development issues, if that's a direction, that management is trying to go in and that residents are trying to go in, and that was something I could contribute to that, then I would be, more than interested. But I would never want to, forget that I was there as a fiduciary. So that would be.
Yeah, no,
my
I
perspective.
don't misunderstand me. I know that you're not, but you'd be able to see that from your perspective as a board member, where the needs are and be able to facilitate. I think that's where the experience comes in. And I'll just ask my last question as well, as with these, the overwhelming budget issues, do you support the initiatives such as RAD and looking at alternative methods to keep the property, improve the property and build new property?
I have heard things about RAD, and I've read a few things about it, but I don't really consider myself to be well-informed by my standards. So I would, my preconceived notion is that it seems like there's a general consensus of informed people that this is something that needs to be done, or this is a direction that generally the various housing communities across the country are going in and have to go in. But I don't know that, and I don't assume that when I get a chance and take the opportunity to zero in on the data that all of my conclusions will be exactly the same as other conclusions that other people have. So I would have to roll up my sleeves and really understand the full business case and understand, well, have we considered alternate B and C and all the consequences and unintended consequences. But it is my general understanding that that RAD is an almost essential part of the path that is open, to HACA and to other similarly situated public housing communities.
That's it. Thanks. I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, are there any questions that you have of us?
I don't have any
So you
questions.
can donate to.
Right.
I don't even want to know the answer to that.
We have your questions to forward to the Ethics Committee for their review, and we again thank you so much for your interest in the Housing Authority Board and for appearing today and offering your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Alderwoman Tierney, I believe those are the only two things on our agenda. Are you open for discussion?
As far as
These two?
yes.
It looks like we have a little bit more due diligence to do with forwarding some of the questions to the Ethics Committee and getting answers for the nominees, which hopefully won't change their decision to be agreeable to serve on the board, but just so that we're sure that we're giving fair and accurate responses to some of the very good questions that were asked, so that we are all on the same page. So it sounds like it might be wise to postpone voting. That would also serve the interest of Alderman Payon, who stated that he would like to have the opportunity to be present for the vote as well. And then it would give him the ability to have the full breadth of information if we reconvene on it once we have the answers from ethics.
Have you access, or did you receive Chapter 2.08, the City of Annapolis Ethics Code? Or can we provide them?
We certainly can. I think that the disclosure that kind of walks you through that is something that a person typically does once they're already on the board or commission.
Yeah.
But
It's a two-step, I mean, what is,
the Housing Authority board members.
I guess we should be clear, we're not really talking about obstacles in applying or versus them in their role, or
In the financial disclosures for HACA board members is in 208052, and it states that it needs to be done annually and then at the time of appointment as well.
Okay.
So it would generally happen after you are confirmed by the council, but then the other part of the code that references at the time of appointment, public disclosure to the appointing authority. I tried to just do a thorough reading of the code so that all those things would be publicly disclosed, so that we wouldn't have any prohibitions with going forward with appointing, so
Okay,
that we satisfied that provision there just by way of the testimony, and we don't have to belabor that to go back and get disclosures, which typically aren't done until after your
Yeah, I
appointment.
saw that, thank you for that. Saves us some time, what we did today. And the questions to the chair, the ethics chair, will do that, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
we will just send them by email and then just confer all together to make sure we have all the questions first. I'll give Alderman Payon the opportunity to weigh in if he had any questions for the Ethics Committee as well. Forward those as a bundle and then get the response back
Okay.
and then vote on it at our next meeting.
Okay.
Does that sound fair?
Yes, and Rob Savage, I guess, is, his question is, you have?
Yes,
Yeah.
his question I did ask of Mr. Gibbs and he did respond, so I'll follow up with Alderman Savage to see if there was anything else that he wanted to forward to the Ethics Committee. He, of course, will have his opportunity when the vote is before the council to confirm, to ask any additional questions or follow-up questions that he may have.
Okay, so our time frame is before our next meeting, right?
Yes, I'm going to try and see if Ethics can give us a review before our meeting of the Development Committee, and if we can tack on a,
When is that? Let's see.
the Development Committee meets on Tuesday, the 20th at 7:30 or at 7 p.m. So I'll see what the availability of council chambers is to bring us in at maybe 6:30, just to give us a half an hour before the Development Committee convenes, and I'll check with Ms. Green as well to see what her availability is to have a meeting on that day so that we can digest
Yeah.
everything that comes back and then vote so that we can get it before the council in
Right.
April.
Yeah, we could start earlier. I don't know if there's something earlier in the council that night. I don't see it on the calendar, but, so the 20th, we could start at 7 or something to confirm that.
Excellent. So we will shoot for that and kind of tie all those ends up before then and try to have it on the agenda that day.
Yeah. Jane, does the mayor, do you have any questions or anything?
I guess the only question I have is that the student, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I got you up here.
Being all cozy there. I guess the only question I have is that, is there any way that
Front row.
is there any way that we could do this before, and have it before the city council on the 19th? I know that the mayor's anxious to get the board populated.
That's why I asked. I know there's some urgency.
Yeah.
Definitely. I will see if, I know that Thursday we have a work session and we'll all be here for
Oh,
that.
good point,
If
yeah.
for some reason, if ethics were able to respond to us prior to Thursday, maybe we could agree, and try to judge how long the work session will go, tacking on a meeting after the work session. Ms. Green is telling me that's not possible. Would that not, we wouldn't have time to give notice? Is that the issue?
Tomorrow's my birthday.
Oh, that's right. Who's staffing our,
Work
is
session.
Regina?
3
Okay,
to 5.
that's right. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's Miss Green's birthday, so that wouldn't work. It looks like we, say it again? So it wouldn't be enough time for notice either way. So it looks like Ms. Herska, how do I pronounce your last name?
Ruska. But you could
Ruska?
just, Ruska. The H
Oh.
is silent.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ruska. That, it looks like we may not be able to get it in before, if the meeting weren't rescheduled for Maryland Day, we probably would have been good. But with the meeting being on the 19th, it looks like there's not enough time on the calendar to get it back before the council from the Ethics Commission. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sure. You have to come to the microphone for the viewing audience, Mr. Miller, that
Can I
can't
stay
capture
here?
your voice. Yes.
I just wanted to say that from my perspective, and I don't know about Phil Gibbs, but the questions that we exchanged related to ethics are not answers that I need in order to be completely willing to serve. So
Excellent.
I just want to make sure that that doesn't impact your schedule unless there are questions that you have to have answered in order to decide on the suitability of my nomination.
I think it's the language when you said "at the time of," those are the ones that need to be addressed now.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for your flexibility for being committed to the board either way. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I think that it will depend on what the ethics comes back with, what the chair and what the board comes back with. But I think that we may have asked all the questions of you that we may need. And if your commitment is, if I can or cannot contribute, or if I can or cannot, then either way, I'm fine. I just want to know my parameters. Then I think that we should be good with going forward with just forwarding you the responses from the commission, and then going forward thereafter.
Great, that's great, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gibbs, is that same for you as well?
That is the same. I would only ask, just as a courtesy, if I could get emailed to me the ethics code.
Certainly.
And I would just be delighted to read something like that.
Certainly.
Dose of it today.
Right. Right. So we'll work on those things as a committee, Alderwoman Tierney, and confer, and then we'll see if there's any way possible to meet the mayor's goal of having it in before the 19th, but it's looking now like that may not be a possibility, but certainly I don't see any barrier to being ready for the council meeting on April 9th.
No,
Okay.
for that, no.
Thank
Okay.
you. Is there a motion, or is there any other business before the committee, anything for the good of the order?
No, not for no.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I motion, in the absence of Fred, that we adjourn.
And I second that motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries.